Well, there's quite a story behind that. 2007, I was 52 that year. So, as you can imagine, there's a bunch of stuff that happened before that. I was raised in a two-parent home. Looked kind of normal from the outside. There was a lot of heavy religion in that. And my mom got married pretty young, and she didn't really know a lot about raising kids. So she chose what today would be felony child abuse, violent enforcement for behavioral control. And I got a lot of beatings, a lot of physical and emotional and a little bit of sexual, but mostly physical and emotional abuse growing up. Where that left me is believing that I wasn't good enough, like I was not okay. And I left home at 17, convinced that my assignment in life was to prove to my mom that I was okay, sort of get that stamp of approved in my forehead. Of course, I never did. And where that led me was it led me to deny my own gifts, which I have a lot of musical talent, and I wanted to do that. And that was not okay. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 60s, and that was the time of the birth of the original hippies thing and music and garage bands and rock and roll and drugs and the whole thing, and that was all evil. So I couldn't do what I wanted to do, and I believed that I was supposed to do what I had been sort of taught to do. So what that did is for the next 35 years after I left home at 17 until 52, was I lived a roller coaster of depression, serious depression, didn't get any help for it because you weren't supposed to talk about those things or your feelings, in those years. Success, I created a lot of success in an effort to prove myself. And then feeling like I didn't deserve it, I would sabotage it. So I rode a roller coaster of success and self-sabotage up and down several times. And by that, I mean very significant positions in work, or I made a lot of money. And then I would trash them, like literally do something to get fired or to lose the job. And then I would do it again and do it again. And each time got bigger, more success and higher, and then worse crashes. During that same time, I was married and divorced 3 times because I didn't know how to be in a relationship. Because of my own mental illness stuff, which I wasn't doing anything about because I didn't know enough to do that. So when we find ourselves in 2007, here's the situation. I am back at the top in terms of making money. I'm single again for the 3rd time. I have 4 of my 10 children living with me as a single dad. I was a $3,000 a week cocaine addict and making enough money that didn't matter. I had attempted suicide a couple of times, and the second time was 2 weeks before what I'm going to tell you happened. So that's where we were, and I was miserable. I hated my life. I hated myself enough that I had attempted to end my life again. And that's where we were in August of 2007. And of course, I wrote a book about that called Tightrope of Depression, which I'm not going to talk about the details, but I've given you the extreme highlights, lowlights, whatever, in this brief introduction. So I came home, excuse me, from work on a Friday night in August of 2007, and I was going to go out and party for the weekend, and the 4 kids I had living with me were all teenagers. We were kind of the party house because I was a crappy dad, and so they always had their friends over, and it was pretty messy situation in terms of what went on in the house and everything. So anyway, I was ready to go out and party for the weekend. And for some reason, before I went out, I had this urge to turn on the television. And that doesn't sound like anything, except I didn't watch TV. I mean, I'd bought the newest, coolest stuff because you do that when you have a lot of money, right? And I had 4 teenagers in the house and the friends and everything. So great big flat screen, everything, whatever. I picked up the remote and realized I didn't know how to turn the TV on. So I asked one of my kids, my 16-year-old daughter, she punched some buttons and, threw the remote at me, dipweed. And it landed on a program that I'd never heard of, and it may not be on anymore because that was nearly 20 years ago, 18 years ago, and it was called Intervention. Intervention was a reality TV show about families who staged professional interventions for busted loved ones. Like they'd call, counselors or priests or whatever, together, and then they'd lure the person there to have an intervention, right, to try to help them. Anyway, the protagonist in this show was a high-ranking executive with a cocaine problem. So I watched the show for about 10 minutes, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not watching this crap. So I turned it off, and I mean, obviously the irony wasn't lost on me, but I'm not watching this crap. So I turned it off and did some other stuff and was ready to go party. And I had this irrepressible urge. I had to turn the television back on. So this time I knew how, so I did. And that show started over. And we didn't have a recorder, and it wasn't on the schedule. And no, it can't do that. I understand. But it did, and that freaked me out. So I watched the show. It went badly. The guy yelled at his family, swore he didn't have a problem, stomped out of the intervention, et cetera, et cetera. And when I got over, instead of going out to party, it freaked me out. So I went to bed. And when I went to bed, I went to hell. And what I mean by that is I went somewhere. I felt out of body. I was in a big room like a theater. And I was watching these scenes from the stage, and I could hear all the voices and stuff. And the scenes were all scenes from my life. And every scene was focused on suffering. The suffering that had been inflicted on me as a kid, growing up through and including the suffering I had inflicted on everybody else as a drug addict and, broken person, and divorces, and just the disaster that my life had been. And the experience of watching those was so intense that I can't describe it. It was intense. It was painful. It was agonizing. And it went on forever. And after a long time, obviously at the time I had no idea how long, but it felt like forever, I heard a voice. And it was behind me a little bit, and it said very clearly, "It is enough." And it wasn't a shout. It wasn't anything. It was just, "It is enough." I woke up and I was completely freaked out for 3 reasons. 1, I was all twisted and upside down and backwards in bed. And 2, all of the bedding was completely soaked, like to wring it out. And I never knew why, but I made up the reason. I imagined that it was because the intensity of the experience had caused me to have that kind of, sweat or whatever. But I mean, it was intense. It was like you could wring it out. I didn't even know you could lose that much water. But anyway, the 3rd reason, and the biggest, was the sun was shining in the window, and the window faced west. So I got up and realized it was 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon. So I'd been somewhere for 18 hours, and I sat thinking about what had just happened and what I'd seen and everything. And I knew one thing. I realized, okay, I've been invited to change. I don't know how. I don't know where to start. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know anything, but I'm done. We're done with this. So I got up and I threw away about $1,000 worth of drugs and stuff that I had laying around, because I always had that. And I quit cold turkey that day. And that got me sober, but it didn't do anything about how I got there in the first place. I mean, the self-sabotage, the depression, the struggles, the self-loathing, hating myself, and all the rest. But that was only the first half of the divine intervention. On Monday, I knew I had to get away from everything I'd been doing. That was the 30 years. I'd been in the business I was in 30 years, from 77 to 2007. So anyway, I went back to work on Monday and knew I had to change things, but I was at least now sober. And because of the position that I had, I used to get a lot of free stuff. I used to make decisions in that position that affected other companies, sometimes to the tune of billions of dollars. And so I got lots of be nice to Kellen stuff, not bribes, but, tickets to this and front row seats on the ice, because I was in Canada, right, for hockey games and concerts, and expensive bottles of booze, like I needed that, that kind of stuff, right? Be nice to Kellen stuff. So one of the things I got was a pair of tickets to see a Yo-Yo Ma concert. Now, if you know classical music, you know who that is. And if you don't, you don't. But in the classical world, that's like, oh! And so I was excited out of my mind. And then I thought, wow, I don't want to waste this other ticket, because they were like $1,000 a piece for the tickets. So, and I certainly didn't have anybody to take. So I talked to the groups that I managed, and I said, who likes classical music? And a woman in one of the groups said, well, I do. And I said, have I ever given you anything before? And she said, no. I said, okay, fine. See you there. So I gave her the ticket, 2-3 weeks later, and we met at the venue, and the concert was spectacular, like I knew it was going to be. Now, as of the concert, I'm now nearly 3 weeks stone cold sober. And halfway through the concert, and of course the tickets were together, but we hadn't come together. I had this feeling come over me that I recognized from 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks before. And I heard this voice say to me, "You need to marry this woman." And I said, "You are insane." I said, "I have screwed that up 3 times. I don't know how to do it. I'm 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks sober. Like, this is not happening." So later that night, we were backstage because they were backstage passes and tickets to the reception, and that's how come they were so expensive. And the voice came back and said, "And you need to tell her tonight." I went nuts. I'm like, no, there's a lot of problems with that. First of all, I actually don't know her. I mean, I knew who she was because she's in one of my groups, but I don't know her well enough to know if she's in a relationship. Like, I don't even know that. And second, like she could have me arrested or for harassment or, HR or something. No, we're not going to do that. And you don't win those arguments. So I did. And it went about like you would have expected. Are you insane? And, she left. And the good news was she wasn't in a relationship, which I didn't know. And the other piece of good news is she didn't call the cops or the HR or whatever. She didn't do anything. Over the next 3 or so weeks, she had her own set of experiences. And 3 or 4 weeks after that concert, she resigned from her position and her entire career. I walked away from millions of dollars of contracts that I had. I didn't have a job. I had a consulting position, but it was permanent. And walked away from all that stuff, and we walked off into the sunset together. And that was 17 years ago last December. So we just celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. And it was as crazy as it sounds. And what I know is she was literally the angel that was sent to help me learn how to be a person, learn how to tell the truth, learn how to have a friend, learn how to be a friend. Because even though I was 52 and had 10 kids and 3 ruined marriages, I didn't know how to do any of that stuff at all. And that's why I'd been one of the consequences of my life and my disastrous life. So, and the most interesting and fun part of that was her name is Joy. Okay, so, and we literally walked away from everything in October. And so that was like barely 60 days after the first event. And about a month after the concert, she moved in October. We quit everything and we got married in December. And that's how come we've got 17.5 years now. Though those events got me sober, it didn't do anything, like I said, about how I got there. And so she knew everything. I mean, like I told her everything before we got started because I didn't want there to be any surprises. And she was invincible. She found me counselors to talk to and just supported me for the next 2 or 3 years as I got my mental health organized and learned how to be vulnerable and learned how to talk to people and learned how to do the things that I had never learned to do. After 2 or 3 years of that, in about 2010, I had made radical and massive changes about who I was being, and everything else. And then it occurred to me, well, you could really be helpful to other people who are going through some of this same kind of stuff with all that I have learned and am doing. And so I began to be overwhelmed with this yearning and desire to help, to be of service because of what I had experienced and was continuing to experience. And I thought, how will I do that? And 2 things occurred to me. One is I should start writing. And 2, I thought, well, I guess that's coaching, so maybe I should do that. I really didn't know anything about it at all. So I decided to become a coach and did some studying and did whatever, and also began to write. After that, from 2010 to 18, so for about 8 years, I began to grow a coaching practice. I'd written a dozen books by 2018, which is like, a book and a half or so a year. I have 20 now, and so that's still going on. And I was very successful. I began to have clients all over the place and, do really well and be feeling fulfilled now. For the first time in my life, I was doing something I wanted to do. I was connected to. I felt like it was right. It was a divine purpose. It was meaningful. It made a difference. It mattered to people. And I was able to do stuff really well and was really excited. So that period of growth was really steep, especially the first 3 years. But even after, I decided to be a coach, I didn't know how to do that. And so all of that was growth process. And we were doing really well. In 2016, we moved. We'd been living in Phoenix. We moved in Canada when that happened. We moved in end of 2008 to Phoenix. We lived there till 2016. And in 2016, we moved back up to Canada to take care of my wife's mom, who's now 93 and a half. She'll be 94 in September. She's a few years younger then, but she needed somebody to take care of her, and there wasn't anybody. So now she lives with us and has for 4 or 5 years. But anyway, in 2018, we're up in Canada doing well. I went to a lot of conferences and did a lot of good stuff. And we decided in the summer of 2018 to go on a cruise. And neither one of us had been on a cruise before for whatever reason. And so we did. And so in June of 2018, we did that. And it was in the Baltic Sea over there by where you are in Holland. And so we went to Tallinn, Estonia, and Helsinki, and, St. Petersburg, which that'll probably never happen again, but, all of that kind of stuff. And it was great. We had a lot of fun. At the end, I got sick. And so we were done. We're back in Oslo, and we're going to go to Amsterdam and then fly home over the pole. And so in Oslo, it was Monday, and I was getting sick, and I had a fever. And so the next day we flew to Amsterdam and then home. And I was obviously sick on the flight. And of course, that was pre-pandemic. Today, they would have just thrown me out the window. But, then they were just really nice and brought me ice and blankets and whatever. I got home on Tuesday afternoon, and that was day 2. And this will matter in a minute. And Oslo was day 1. Amsterdam was day 2. And we got home Tuesday late afternoon, and on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, things get worse and worse and worse. So that's day 3, 4, and 5. And finally on Friday, I'd gone to bed, and I kept thinking things would get better, and they didn't. And so by Friday, I was sick. I could barely function. And so we went to a walk-in clinic here, which they have in Canada, it was close to our house, and we'd gone there a bunch of times. But we went over there, and they wouldn't let me in. The nurse took one look at me and said, "You can't come in. There's nothing we can do for you. Go to the ER right now." Okay, so we go to the emergency room, and, you go to ER, it might take an hour, 2, 3, depends on how many people are there and all that stuff. In 10 minutes, I was in a private room. And I didn't even know they had private rooms. The only thing I've ever seen are those curtains and all that stuff in the emergency room. I'm in a private room with a door in 10 minutes. So that was nice, except it scared me because, took cuts in front of the whole room. So they kept asking me what had happened, where we'd been, and they did all these tests and all this listening and sent me to get x-rays. And it was clear that this was not okay. Finally, later in the day, getting to Friday night, I'd been in the ER in that room for a long time because they were looking for a room. They said, "Yeah, we're going to admit you. There's no question. So we just need to find a room, et cetera, et cetera." So I sent Joy home because we had cats and dogs. And I said, "Just come back tomorrow and we'll see where we are." So they put me up in a room, and I was in a private room in the hospital, not just in the ER. And that's like a private room. Okay. And then the doctor came in and said, "So, at a minimum, you have terrifying pneumonia in both lungs. But that's not all, and we're not sure yet." Okay. They came back after a while and said, "Yeah, we're going to put you in the intensive care. We're going to put you in the ICU." Okay. And then they came, and they didn't right then, but they said they were going to. And then they came back in another hour and said, "Yeah, we're going to put you in biological isolation. So think of double doors and masks and hazmat suits." And, I'm like, okay. And then they came back and said the thing you never want to hear. The doctor came in and said, "So do we have permission to intubate you and do anything we need to do to preserve your life?" What? Okay. So then I picked up my phone, and by that time I was trembling so badly I could barely move. But before I picked it up, I went into a state of meditation because I was a long-time meditation practitioner. And when I went into meditation, I could feel something really weird. I feel like a zipper. I could feel my body and my spirit unzipping, like separating. So I knew I was dying. So I picked up my phone, and like I said, I was trembling so badly I could hardly operate it. But I sent Joy a text that had 3 lines. The first line said, "ICU." And the second line said, "Isolation, intubation. And the third line said I may be dying. And she didn't see it because it was now middle of the night. She was asleep. About 2 or 3 in the morning, she got a call from the hospital, the one you never want to get. And the nurse said, "Are you coming?" And she said, "What?" And then she looked and saw my text. Somewhere in that time, between 11:30 and 11 or something and 2 or 2:33 in the morning, I had coded, flatlined, and they knew it was coming because that's why they ask all those questions. Of course, I didn't know. And so I flatlined. And when I did, and I died. And when that happened, by then I was in the ICU, but of course I didn't know all that till later. I sat up spiritually, my spirit body sat up, and because I was on a stretcher, so I sat up. And the room had changed. Instead of being full of nurses and doctors and people jumping around trying to revive me, it later turned, I saw a picture, Joy took a picture later, I was literally restrained on a bed with restraints and, you've seen the pictures in the movies. Okay, and that's what I looked like. So I sat up spiritually, and the room had changed. It was kind of gray, like a foggy, a little bit misty, foggy, and a soft gray color. And I couldn't really see the floor, and I couldn't really see the ceiling or the walls, so I couldn't really tell how big it was. But I looked over my shoulder, excuse me, and I could see a doorway over there. And for some reason, I wanted to be at the doorway. So suddenly, I'm standing at the doorway, and I'm leaning on the door jamb on my right shoulder. And I looked across through the doorway. There wasn't a door. It was open. And I saw that the other side of the doorway was white. My side was this soft gray, and the other side was white. And it wasn't light streaming through or anything. It was just gray on my side and white on that side. And then I realized there was someone standing on that side, leaning on the door jamb, like right there. And that person looked at me and said, "Do you want to come home?" And in a millionth of a second, in the way that you know things that you know in that kind of place, I knew who I was talking to, what the doorway was, what the question meant, and everything, like instantaneously. So we talked about it for a while. We talked about everything that had happened in 2007, everything I'd been doing since then, the books that I'd written, the mission that I was on, trying to help people and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about it, and as we talked, I just had this feeling of not being complete. So after we talked for a while, I said, "Well, I'm not done." And he said, "Okay." And that was the end of the first of 3 conversations. I'm quite sure that that's when they were able to restart my heart and revive me. And I made a conscious and intentional choice. I'm staying. The next day, now I was in a coma for 17 days. But the next day, and people often ask, "How did you know it was the next day?" It was the next day, okay? You just know stuff. So the next day, I'm back at the same door, on the door jamb, talking to the same person, and the topic of the previous day didn't come up because that was decided. So, okay, you're going to stay. What are you going to do? And I talked some more about what I've been trying to do, what I'd learned in my own healing and trying to help other people with their healing and struggles and fear and depression and not good enough and the yearning we all have to add good to the world and make a difference and everything else and everything I'd been doing. And we talked about all that and that I wanted to keep going. And I talked about some of my clients and things that I was doing and places I'd been speaking. And we just talked about it. And then I had a really powerful, intense experience. There's a movie that was made sometime in the 90s, so about 30 years ago. And it's a movie about aliens beaming information to Earth, and they build a spaceship and stuff like that. It was a movie called Contact with Jodie Foster, and I refer to that movie because it was a scene in that movie. That's the only thing I have ever seen that is kind of like what happened. When they build that spaceship, it's not a spaceship, it's a sort of a round thing. Anyway, she's transported energetically all over the place, and that's how it felt. So I was on a journey through the universe. I saw and witnessed both physically with my eyes and energetically power, glory, worlds, universes, space, incomprehensible stuff. And the feeling was just one of overwhelming light, majesty, possibility, power, love, and it went on for a long time. And it felt like if I hadn't been in some kind of a protective bubble, which is also why it looks like that movie because she was in this capsule. But anyway, if I hadn't been in some kind of a protective bubble, I would have been incinerated in an instant. And that went on for a long time. At least that's how it felt in that realm. I don't have any idea how long is, but it went on for a long time, and I saw and heard unspeakable things of beauty and glory and power. And then at the end of that, I'm back at the doorway, and I'm feeling sort of breathless, like, wow, all this stuff, right? And so 4 things sort of materialized in my mind as absolute, foundational, eternal pillars. And number 1 was that every single one of us is a divinely, lovingly, intentionally created being. Not maybe, not sort of, no accidents. You're that. The second thing is that every single one of us have a mission, a purpose that we not only agreed to, but we were stoked about, we were excited about before we came. The third thing is that we have the gifts and talents that we need to not only accomplish that mission, but to have fun with it. And the fourth thing is that all the help we need is available from both sides of that door. And when that settled in my mind, I said, well, since that's true, why do we settle for crumbs? And I don't know if in the economy of heaven, brevity is a virtue, but the answer was 4 words. He looked at me and he said, because you don't believe. I didn't facepalm. I thought about it. And I said, okay, what can I do? How can I help that? What can I do? Oh, glad you asked. So then what came then was a framework about belief, how to change, how to identify and change those core beliefs we have of not good enough, not valuable, all that kind of stuff that gets in our way. And it was called the Book of Context. So I wrote 2 books about this. One's called Meeting God at the Door, Conversations, Choices, and Commitments of a Near-Death Experience. And the companion volume is called the Book of Context, which contains that framework for how to identify and change those beliefs. So that conversation felt like it was really long. The next day, that was it. The next day, back at the door, and this time I came, I was really excited. I was like, yeah, I'm excited. I'm repeating everything over and over again in my mind, the context framework and all this stuff. And back at the same door, same thing, only I felt like I was just kind of bouncing like somebody sitting on one of those bouncy balls at a desk, right? That's kind of how it felt. And the third day was just one question. He looked at me and he said, are you sure? And I was taken aback a little bit, almost like, what do you mean, am I sure? Am I stupid? Am I wrong? Am I biting off more than I can chew? Hello? Am I sure? What? So we talked about all that and all those different questions from every point of view. After doing that, I felt comfortable, confident, capable, and like all the help I was going to need was going to be available. That was one of the principles I knew anyway. So after talking about it for a while, I finally said, yeah, I'm sure. Okay. And nothing was said, but the conversation ended with a finality that I knew we were done. And that was the end of the experiences. Now, I was in a coma for another 14 days. And a couple of weeks later, when I came out of the coma, all I could do was talk about context and the framework and what had happened and all that kind of stuff. To tell Joy and to nurses and anybody and everybody. And I'm sure that I thought, well, they're going to think I'm crazy. But they didn't, because a few days after I got out of the coma, when I left the ICU to go back to the regular part of the hospital, 2 things happened. Infectious disease head, it was a university hospital, so the head of the infectious disease department told me, he said, what you had has a 10-day kill rate of 100%. I got to the hospital at the end of day 5, and they didn't even figure out what I had until the end of day 8. So, of course you died. Duh. Number 1. And number 2, he said, when you get okay, I want you to come back and tell me what you saw. So what I said wasn't as crazy as I thought to them. So that's the experience. And I was in the hospital for another few weeks. During the coma, I'd lost 35 pounds. I couldn't walk. I could barely move. What I had was necrotizing MRSA, which is a superbug in both lungs and in my bloodstream. It had completely trashed both of my lungs. Fortunately, it didn't get to my heart. And like I said, it kills you. I mean, always. So that's what happened. That's what I had. I'm back here by choice. And I am on a mission with those 4 things. And my commitment this year is to reach 300 before October 14th. My year starts October 14th. And people ask, well, why October 14th? And the answer, because that's Joy's birthday. So I'm on a mission this year to reach 300 million people with the message of their own divinity, their capability and their possibility, and to show them and help them create purpose, prosperity, and joy. Because that's what we're here to do. And we're all going to go through these challenges, some worse than others, but we have that opportunity to find and fulfill the things that we have the talents, gifts, and calling to do. So that's the story.
I love it. I have to say, it's nothing short of amazing how you were able to change your life. I'm pretty sure that it wasn't easy a lot of the times, and that it got pretty tough.
Here's what I know. I know I interrupted you. Here's what I know. At the time in 2007, if there was ever anybody that should have been left at the bottom of the canyon, you know, I was that. I was the poster boy. And even in that circumstance, the invitation was given. But it was only an invitation. It didn't do any of the work. It didn't do any of the work that had to be done to change or anything else. So it was crawling over broken glass. It was blood on the floor. It was everything you could imagine to make a choice. The only thing that happened was when I got up that day and sat on the side of the bed and said, I'm done. I had no idea what was going to be required. I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea what would be required, but I knew one thing. I'm going. I don't care. I'm going. And that was before joy happened and before everything else. And so the choice to change, no matter what it takes, that's first. And I didn't have any idea. I mean, I quit. I had nowhere to go. I had no job. I had nothing. It's like I jumped and I built my parachute on the way down. And I don't necessarily recommend that approach, but for me, that was what I had to do. And so you're right. It was everything that you imagine that it ought to be in terms of the work required and the commitment and the dedication and all of that kind of stuff. So yes.
I want to ask you about one of the 4 messages that you received, which is that we are all divine beings and we are all meant to be here to enjoy life. Now, if I were to say this to 2007, who is, who is using drugs every week, who is hating his life, who's not sure how he could ever get unstuck, what would I need to say to get through to that person, to get him to believe me?
So that's a fabulous question, because every one of you, me, and every single person in your audience, you know that you've had times in your life when you felt intuition, inspiration, that nudge to sort of do something different, to talk to somebody, to go somewhere. You felt it, and you felt it repeatedly. So had I. Hundreds, maybe thousands of times, and I had ignored it. The only reason what happened in 2007 was so loud and so noisy is because I had ignored it, and it was still only an invitation. So I don't know what you or anything could have said. It would have needed to have been loud enough to just at least wake me up to the possibility. Like even the divine intervention, the 2x4, the going through hell for 18 hours and it is enough and waking up, it was still the choice to go into the unknown. Like I didn't have any idea what to do next or what that meant. And it was breathlessly terrifying because I did not know anything. I just knew that I had been invited. And so I can tell you 2 things. One, every single one of you listening right now, you've had that invitation multiple times from somebody else, from your own feelings, from circumstances in your life, and you have. And 2, if you need another one, this is your invitation now.
You're very right. Your 4th message. Were you going to say something else?
No, that's it. This is your invitation. So the 4th message was what? All the help you need is available from both sides of that door. What about that?
What does that mean? Where should we go if we're in that place and we're saying, well, I've been asking for help, I've been praying, I've been wanting that help. It does not show up at my door. Where should I look for it?
I don't know how it showed up for me, even though joy came. I mean, Like, she listened to her own set of things that happened because, at the first idea, she thought I was insane, and I was, and the whole thing was insane. She listened to her own nudges and inspiration and knew that it was the right thing to do, even though she knew I'd been sober for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and she knew all this stuff, and I had 10 kids and, the drama that had been the battlefield of my life. So here's what I can say about the help. Number one, never quit, because we know where quitting goes. If we quit, give up, and stop, you're finished. You're done. I quit. I'm done. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is it'll come in any number of ways. It comes from something you read. It comes from someone you talk to. It does for me. It comes from an idea that you have. It comes from the feeling of, I'm just not going to give up. This is rough. This is bad. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. That may be a true statement. I don't know what to do. Okay. Then what is simply the next step? I have never found that, at least in those first years, I have a vision now, but in the first years, I couldn't see past my nose. So what is the next step? Well, the next step for me was stay sober. The next step for me was go see a shrink. What do you talk about? I have no idea. But I know I've been doing this all alone all my life, and it sucked. So I need some help. I went through 5 or 6 of them. The first counselors I went to talk to, I was a disaster. I'd never gotten help. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I went and I told problems, and I analyzed them myself and did all the talking. It was 6 months before I learned just to be vulnerable and say whatever I had to say and then shut up and listen, because I was so full of doubt, fear, and of my own whatever. So it's a process of allowing yourself to change. I need to change. Here's what I've learned. Nobody's going to do it for you. Nobody's going to come and say, ding, you're fixed. It didn't happen to me that way. Mine was, ding, wake up. Where do I go? I don't know. I better go talk to somebody. Who? I don't know. Go find the phone book. Let's go talk to somebody and see. Anyways, it's not going to come in an Amazon box. It's not going to come in the mail. It doesn't come in a gold-wrapped cube. It doesn't come with the label on it, I'm the answer. You just keep looking and you start taking action. Because what I've learned, for me, if I sit and wait, nothing happens. So I go do stuff. I say yes to things, possibilities. Yes, I'll go see, and I go with the idea of this could be helpful, not with the idea of nothing works, this probably won't either, because then we create energy around us that is repulsive. And I had to learn that because my coping style before had been very self-contained and not sharing anything. I had to unlearn all that. And so if you're struggling right now, go get some help. And I don't know if that's a priest, a counselor, a friend, a mate. I don't know who it is for you, but I know it's there. Because there's nothing interesting or special about me other than that I keep saying yes and I never quit.
I always think of that whenever I want to quit something because it's too hard or because it doesn't seem to be working. I'm like, no, I need to maybe try another way. I need to maybe try it more times so that I get better at it. But essentially, I shouldn't be quitting it. So I love that.
I love what you're saying because it's so true. We give up too easy. We give up too easy. Okay, we've been trained by television and media and everything else that everything should be solvable in the length of a TV sitcom. Download and double click. Oh, personal development and growth. Like, we're here to become something more. And it takes work and it takes effort and energy. And it's worth it because of the possibility. Like, you and I, we're free to settle for mediocrity. We're free to settle for what's easy and obvious. You're free to do that. But you're also going to be stuck with the nagging feeling that there's more available. And there is. And it's not available in easy mode if it were everybody to have it. It's available because it takes what it takes to get where you're going. Just because I want it doesn't mean suddenly an easy path appears. At least I've never figured that out. What I know is that if I want it, and I'm committed, I'll figure out a way. If you spell my name right, there are only 2 in the entire world, and the other one is my son, and he's, 20-something years younger than me, so you can tell. If you Google my name, there are thousands of hits. All my books are on Amazon. I have 94, nearly 100 songs in commercial release. They're on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and everything. all kinds of genres, but the last 35 or 40 have been sort of pop style that tell stories from the books. I wrote a book, Tightrope of Depression, and an album of music telling stories from that, and just more like so. And this KellenFlukigerMedia.com that's on the screen up here, go there. There's a contact form. And, if you want to reach out and get a hold of me on most socials, LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube and some other ones. I don't do that for myself anymore. But so I'm not hard to find. I'm not hard to find. And I'm delighted to meet people, my business, my life, my love, my passion. I don't do anything except work on my 300 million. People. That's all I do. First breath to last. Lives, shows. Yes, I have clients, and they all just come from conversations that I have about possibility. I'm running a group right now of authors who have come and want me to help write books. And in the meantime, we've created a publishing company, and we published not only my books, we did our first book through the New York House, but lots of mine and client books and everything else. So if you have a message, if you have something you want to do, that's my purpose, is to facilitate, help, encourage, love, lift, bless, and not listen to any nonsense about can't, because that's just not true. And I want to honor you on your show for being the person that does this work. Podcasting and these kind of shows are a labor of love. It's a lot of work. And I honor you for your mission and purpose to serve, to add good to the world. So thank you.